I miss my husband the moment he steps out of the house. It's not something I can explain easily, and I don't think he understands. We've been married for 6 years, and he still tells me he loves me, but the words fall flat when they come through a rushed text or a tired voice over the phone. He leaves early, comes home late, and sometimes doesn't come home at all for days. Business trips, meetings, emergencies, it's always something. I don't blame him. Not fully. But the quiet in our house has become unbearable. I used to fill the silence with podcasts, audiobooks, new recipes, and cleaning. I even started painting again for a while. But none of it stuck. The stillness clung to me. It made me feel transparent. As if the walls knew me better than my husband did. I'd sit by the window and wait for his car, even though I knew he wouldn't be home until well after dark. I began to memorize the pattern of headlights on the road. Most nights, I went to bed before he got back. He told me the horse would help. He said I needed something to take care of. Something alive. So he bought Night, a tall black stallion, from a nearby breeder. At first, I resented the gesture. Another decision made for me, without asking. Another distraction to keep me occupied, as if I were a child left home with a toy. But Night was different. There was something steady about him. Something calm, attentive, maybe even tender. I would visit the stable in the mornings with my coffee and stand beside him, sometimes without speaking. He would just breathe. Warm, steady breath. And it was more comforting than anything I had felt in a long time. I started brushing him, not out of duty, but because I liked how he leaned into my touch. I talked to him while I worked about nothing and everything. How tired I was. How I missed being held. How strange it was to love someone who was never really there. He would flick his ears, shift slightly, respond in these small ways that felt like conversation. He didn't walk away. He didn't check his phone. He didn't forget what I said yesterday. I didn't realize how much I needed to be heard until I started spending those quiet mornings with Night. There were no big revelations, no dramatic moments. Just small, steady exchanges that made me feel seen. I began waking up looking forward to those mornings, which scared me more than I wanted to admit. I had stopped waiting for my husband to walk through the door. Instead, I started thinking about Night before I fell asleep. How strange is that? How quietly, how deeply that shift crept in. I should have noticed it sooner. Maybe I did. Maybe I just didn't want to stop it. There was a rhythm to our time together that began to feel essential. Night would wait by the fence in the mornings as if he knew I was coming. I didn't need to speak anymore. He sensed everything, when I was restless, when I was calm, when I felt like breaking. He would press his head into my shoulder and stand with me. I wasn't just passing time anymore. I was choosing to be with him, and in those moments, I felt something close to peace. The silence between us was comforting instead of empty. With my husband, silence meant disinterest. With Night, it felt like presence. I'd walk with him in the field, let him roam while I sat on the grass. I watched the way he moved, muscles rippling under sleek black hair, head held high, always aware, always focused. I found myself admiring him more than I should have. There was no sense in denying it. He became more than a companion. He became a space where I could feel again. I stopped talking about my husband. The frustration, the loneliness, I had exhausted those words. Now I talked about memories. About when I used to dance barefoot in the kitchen, how I loved poetry, how I once wanted to learn the piano. Things I had forgotten. Things no one had asked me about in years. Night listened, or, at least, gave me a reason to speak. He became my witness. And in a strange way, that felt more intimate than anything else. There were times I would rest my head against him and close my eyes, letting his warmth anchor me. I'd listen to his breathing and imagine it was someone else's, someone who stayed. I wasn't delusional. I knew he was just an animal. But I also knew what it meant to feel safe, even if the source wasn't human. That safety turned into longing. I wanted more of it. I wanted to be near him constantly, to escape into that feeling every chance I got. Riding him became something different. It wasn't exercise. It wasn't routine. It felt like surrender. The way he moved beneath me, the strength I could feel through every stride, the control and freedom all at once, It stirred something I hadn't felt in a long time. I didn't just feel alive. I felt desired, even though I knew it was all coming from me. It was my own need, mirrored back in every quiet moment we shared. I started dressing differently when I went to the stable. Not for the horse, obviously, but for the way it made me feel. Soft fabrics, flowing robes, bare skin under jackets. I craved that moment of closeness, of contact. The lines between affection and attraction blurred, and I let them. I didn't feel shame. I felt full, awake. I told myself it was innocent, that I was just finding comfort where I could. But deep down, I knew I had already crossed a line. It started with dreams. Not abstract or strange, but vivid and specific. I would see him as a man, tall, strong, dark eyes, with that same quiet gaze that made me feel exposed and understood. He didn't speak in the dreams, but he didn't have to. His presence was enough. I would wake up breathless, the image of him lingering longer than it should have. I stopped pretending it was just about the horse. It was about what he represented. Attention, warmth, a touch that stayed. He had become a vessel for everything I missed. During the day, my thoughts wandered. I'd be doing dishes or folding laundry and suddenly feel the ghost of a hand on my waist, a breath against my neck. But it wasn't my husband I imagined. It was Night, as the man in my dreams, as the figure who gave me back to myself. It wasn't about sex, not at first. It was about closeness. It was about being seen, being chosen. That evolved quickly into something more dangerous. I began to crave moments alone with him. Not the horse, but the fantasy he had become in my mind. I stopped writing texts to my husband. I stopped pretending to care about the meetings, the delays, the next flight. I answered with emojis, short replies, or silence. When he called, I let it ring. I didn't want to fake interest anymore. My energy had shifted. I was pouring it somewhere else, and it felt more honest than anything I'd said to him in months. I never touched Night inappropriately. I never did anything that couldn't be explained. But emotionally, I was gone. I had given parts of myself I didn't even know were still alive. I started writing. Not for anyone, just for me. Pages and pages of what I felt, what I imagined, what I wanted. Sometimes I addressed it to no one, sometimes to the version of him in my mind. I confessed things I couldn't say out loud. How I longed to be taken, to be watched, to be missed. How I wanted hands on my skin, eyes on my mouth, a voice whispering that I was everything. I poured it out without shame, and when I read it back, I didn't recognize myself. But I didn't stop. I once whispered, "I love you," while stroking Night's neck, and I meant it. Not to him, not literally, but to what he had come to mean to me. I felt the words leave my mouth and hated how natural they sounded. I cried afterward. Not because I thought it was wrong, but because I knew I had chosen this. Not consciously, not all at once, but I had let it happen. I had nurtured this fantasy until it felt more real than my marriage. The worst part wasn't the guilt. It was the clarity. I had fallen in love with the idea of someone who didn't exist because the man who once did had already left me behind. He came home on a Thursday, earlier than expected. I heard the car, the door, the clink of his keys on the counter. For a moment, I felt like a stranger in my own house. I didn't run to greet him. I didn't feel relief or joy, just a quiet dread. He kissed my cheek like always, said he missed me, asked about the horse. I nodded, smiled politely, but inside I was somewhere else. With someone else. The gap between us wasn't made of distance anymore. It was something heavier. Something settled. He noticed. Of course he did. He watched me during dinner, waited for something that never came. I spoke only when necessary, kept my voice even. I couldn't fake what I didn't feel. He asked if I was okay. I told him I was tired. He looked unconvinced, but didn't push. That night, he touched me in bed, and I turned away. I said I had a headache. That was true, but it wasn't the reason. The thought of his hands on me felt wrong. They didn't belong to the person I longed for. I felt disconnected from his touch, like it was a memory replaying without sound or meaning. The next morning, I left a journal open on the kitchen table. I didn't plan it. Maybe I wanted him to find it. Maybe I was tired of hiding. Pages filled with thoughts, confessions, dreams, every emotion I had been too afraid to speak. It wasn't written for him, but it was about him, about the emptiness, the silence, and the way I had filled it. He didn't mention it. Not then. Not the next day, either. He carried on like nothing had changed, and maybe he thought pretending would save us. A week later, I found a note inside the journal. One line, written in his handwriting. "I'm sorry I left you alone for too long." That was all. No confrontation. No accusations. Just acknowledgement. And that hurt more than if he'd yelled. Because it meant he knew. He had always known, in some quiet, passive way, that I was slipping away, and he did nothing to stop it. I stopped going to the stable for a while. I needed to breathe. I needed to feel what was real again. The fantasy had given me comfort, but it had also taken something from me, a part of myself that used to believe in connection, in effort, in recovery. I wasn't ashamed of what I felt. I was ashamed of how far I let it go without speaking up. I didn't leave my husband. He didn't leave me. But something between us had broken. And not because of the horse, not even because of the emotional betrayal. It broke because we had both gone quiet, both stopped choosing each other. I still visit night. I still talk to him. But I don't imagine anymore. I just listen. And when I walk back to the house, I do it alone, not because I want to, but because that's what honesty looks like now.